Here's a 20. Keep it, kid. That was all Wesley Amoko had said, and somehow it had brought the whole clubhouse to a stop. The bill lay on the polished floor where Trevor Nash had thrown it, along with a scatter of loonies and toonies that spun and rattled and finally went still against the brass footrail. A woman in golf whites lifted her sandaled foot away from a coin as though it might bite her. Somebody's phone was already up, then another. Nobody said a word. Nobody moved. And Wesley Amoko, 54 years old, stood in his faded canvas jacket and his work boots and looked down at the money on the floor, then up at the young man who had thrown it and did not bend an inch. "Pick it up," Trevor Nash said again, louder this time, the way a man gets louder when he senses the room is no longer entirely his. "If you want it that bad, get down there and pick it up." He had no idea. That's the thing you have to understand before any of the rest of it makes sense. Trevor Nash, 28 years old, assistant manager of the Glenmara Golf and Country Club, did not have the faintest idea that the man he had just ordered to kneel on the floor of his own clubhouse owned the ground under his polished loafers, the roof over his head, the very check that paid his salary. Those coins he'd flung would end up costing him everything: his job, his references, the little version of himself he carried around and mistook for a real man. He just didn't know it yet. So, let me take you back. 3 hours before those coins hit the floor. Before any of this, Wesley Amoko was sitting in a glass-walled office on the 19th floor of a tower on Bay Street in downtown Toronto, and the desk in front of him was buried in paper: purchase agreements, title transfers, environmental assessments, membership rosters going back 40 years. 9 properties, all of them now flying the flag of Northcrest Hospitality, the company Wesley had built out of nothing across 26 years. 3 golf and country clubs, 2 heritage hotels in the Muskokas, a marina, a pair of ski lodges up near Collingwood, and a curling club in Thunder Bay that lost money every winter, and that he'd bought anyway because his mother had learned to curl there. The deal had closed 72 hours ago, $81 million. The biggest single acquisition of his life. His assistant, Simone, knocked twice and leaned in. "Mr. Amoko, the press people want to know if you'll do the announcement at the Yorkville Hotel or at Glenmara. Marketing thinks Glenmara. It photographs better, apparently. The lake behind it." "Cancel my afternoon," Wesley said. She blinked. "Sir? I'm driving out to Oakville." He was already pulling the jacket off the back of his chair. It was a canvas work coat, oil-stained at the cuff, the collar gone soft from years of wear. It looked like something a man would put on to clean out a garage. Simone had worked for him long enough to recognize what it meant. Wesley Amoko did not walk into a property he'd just bought wearing a suit with a photographer trailing behind him. He walked in looking like nobody at all: old boots, no watch, a plain ball cap, no logo, pulled down low. He wanted to see how the people who worked in his buildings treated a man who looked like he had nothing to his name. Because that, he'd learned a long time ago, told him everything the spreadsheets never could. "Should I let the general manager know you're coming?" Simone asked. "So they can?" "No," he said, and there was no unkindness in it. That's the whole point. Here is the part of Wesley Amoko most people never got to see, and you should have it because it matters. When Wesley was a boy, his father, Emmanuel, had worked the grounds crew at a private club not 40 kilometers from where Glenmara now stood. Emmanuel Amoko had come to Canada from Ghana with an engineering diploma that nobody here would honor, and so he cut grass. He raked bunkers at 5 in the morning in the July heat. He salted the walkways in January when the wind came off the lake like a blade. And Wesley remembered it the way you remember a burn, how the members would walk past his father as though he were a piece of the landscape. Not cruel, most of them, just blind. They would let a door swing shut in his face while they talked about their handicaps. They called him Manny, all of them, though his name was Emmanuel, though not one of them had ever asked. One of them, a member with a big laugh and a bigger belly, had once knocked a bucket of range balls off a cart and told Emmanuel to hop to it. And Wesley, 10 years old and holding his father's lunch pail, had watched his father get down on his knees on the wet grass and gather the balls one by one while the man checked his phone. Emmanuel never said a word about it in the car on the way home. He just drove, both hands on the wheel, and at a red light he looked over at his son and said quietly, "You remember this feeling. And then when you have your own, you make sure nobody working for you ever has to feel it. You promise me." Wesley had promised. And every property he ever bought, he walked through it first as his father. invisible, judged, weighed by his coat and his color and found wanting, because a man will show you who he really is the moment he decides you don't matter. So that's who was driving down the 403 that afternoon in a 10-year-old Honda with 240,000 kilometers on it. Not the Mercedes, the Honda. A billionaire in a work coat, coming to see the truth about the newest jewel in his portfolio. Glenmora sat on a rise above Lake Ontario, and even Wesley had to admit it was a beautiful piece of land. The maples had turned, it was the third week of October, and the whole property was gold and rust and burning red against a hard blue sky. The clubhouse was old stone, ivy up one wall, tall windows throwing back the afternoon light. A brass sign at the gate in clean serif lettering, boxwood hedges trimmed to the millimeter. The kind of place where the initiation fee ran into 6 figures and the waiting list was measured in years. Wesley parked the Honda at the far end of the lot between a Range Rover and a Porsche and stepped out into the cold, bright air. Canvas jacket. Work boots still gray with dust from the job site he'd walked that morning. Ball cap. He looked, and he knew he looked, like a man who might have come to fix the furnace. He went in through the front doors anyway. That was always the test, not the service entrance. The front. The lobby smelled of wood smoke and lemon polish and something roasting in the kitchen down the hall. A gas fire snapped in a stone hearth. There was a young woman at the reception desk, early 20s, dark hair pulled back, a name tag that read Kayla. She had the look of someone still new enough to a job that she checked twice whether she'd done a thing right. She glanced up and smiled at him, and it was a real smile. And remember that because it's going to matter later. Afternoon, she said. Welcome to Glenmora. Can I help you find your way? I was hoping to get some lunch, Wesley said. Somebody told me the dining room here does a good bowl of soup. That true? The best, Kayla said, warming to it. It's a squash bisque today. The room's just through, and that was as far as she got, because a hand came down flat on the reception desk, and a voice said, I've got this, Kayla. Trevor Nash came out from the office behind the desk the way a man does when he's decided in advance he isn't going to like what he finds. Slim, tailored quarter zip with the club crest on the chest, hair combed to a hard part, name tag pinned dead straight. He had a smile on him, but it wasn't a smile so much as a gate, the kind that can drop shut the instant it needs to. He looked Wesley up and down. The coat, the boots, the cap, the color of his skin, and Wesley watched the decision get made behind his eyes, quick and total, the way you'd sort mail into the wrong bin. Can I help you? Trevor Nash said. The you did a lot of work. It came out cold and flat, a syllable that meant the opposite of help. I'd like lunch, Wesley said. Same as I told her. Are you a member? No, I understand you can dine as a guest, though. I'll pay. Trevor Nash let out a short breath through his nose, almost a laugh. This is a private club, he said. Members and their invited guests. Are you here with a member? I'm not, Wesley said, patient as still water. But your website says the grill room is open to the public Tuesday through Thursday lunch service. It's Wednesday. Now that was true, and Trevor Nash knew it was true, and you could see the small snag it caught on in his face. He'd been ready for the man to be simply wrong, to be sent packing, and instead the man had read the website. Kayla, behind him, had gone very still, her hands flat on the desk, her eyes moving between the two men like someone watching weather come across the lake. Trevor Nash recovered the way his kind always do. He didn't get less sure of himself. He got meaner. We've had some issues, he said, lowering his voice to that confidential register men use when they're about to say the ugliest thing in the room. People wandering up from the marina, looking for a free meal. Looking for, he gestured vaguely at Wesley's coat, for whatever they can get. You understand. I have to be careful about who I let sit down in there. It's a certain kind of clientele. I've got money, Wesley said quietly. I'll pay before I eat if that makes it easier for you. And here Trevor Nash did something small and telling. He crossed his arms and leaned back against the desk and settled in because he had realized, with a kind of pleasure he would never have admitted to, that he was going to get to enjoy this. Let me guess, he said, you'll pay in. What? A pocket full of change? He smiled the Gates smile. We don't really do the coffee can of coins thing here, friend. Now I want you to notice something because Wesley noticed it. Everything Trevor Nash said was aimed at one thing, making sure this man understood he was less. Not a customer to be turned away for a real reason, a rule, a policy. Less. And there is a very particular flavor of that, isn't there, that gets reserved for a certain kind of man in a certain kind of coat. Trevor Nash never said the word out loud. He didn't have to. He'd found 100 other ways to say it, and he was just getting started. Wesley reached into his jacket and laid a $50 bill flat on the reception desk. Crisp. New. There, he said. For the soup and whatever else. Keep the difference for your trouble. Trevor Nash looked at the 50 the way you'd look at something a dog dragged in. He picked it up between two fingers, turned it over, held it up to the light from the window and tilted it this way and that, running his thumb across the face of it like a man checking for counterfeit ink. Kayla, he said, without looking at her, get me a marker. One of the counterfeit pens. Kayla's face went pale. Trevor, it's a 50, she said. It's obviously, did I ask you, he said. She got the pen from the drawer. Her hand was shaking, just slightly, and Wesley saw that too. Trevor Nash uncapped it and dragged the felt tip across the bill in a long, slow stroke, and the mark came up clean. The pale yellow that means the money is real, and everyone standing near enough to see already knew it was real, and Trevor Nash knew it was real. And he stared at that clean yellow line for a good 3 seconds like it had personally let him down. Then he dropped the 50 on the desk. Can't be too careful, he said. We get a lot of funny money out here. There were people in the lobby now. A foursome had come in off the 18th green, still in their spikes, and stopped near the fireplace to watch. An older couple by the coat check had gone quiet, and down the hall, drawn by something in the air, a broad man in a Glenmara Crest polo had appeared and was leaning in the doorway with his arms folded. Curtis Beaulieu, the club's security, 61, 22 years with the OPP before this, a man with a face that gave away nothing and a stillness that took most people years to learn. He was watching Trevor Nash, and if you knew how to read him, you'd have seen he didn't like a single thing he saw. I'd like my lunch now, Wesley said, and my change. Trevor Nash smiled. He punched something into the little terminal on the desk, made a show of counting, and slid a small mess of bills and coins across the marble. Wesley looked down at it. It was wrong. He'd handed over $50 for a lunch that couldn't have run more than 20, and there on the desk sat a 10, a couple of loonies, some silver. $15, give or take. This is short, Wesley said. No, it isn't. The soup's what, 16? Even with a coffee, I'm owed 30 back. This is 15. Trevor Nash shrugged, one shoulder. Maybe you counted wrong, he said. Happens. He let a beat go by, then added with a little curl to it. Cash people, always so sure about the money. Cash people, Wesley repeated. You know what I mean, and Wesley did know what he meant. Everybody in that lobby knew what he meant. It hung there in the wood smoke and lemon polish, ugly and unmistakable, and still nobody said anything. The foursome by the fire looked at their spikes. The older couple studied the coat check tags. That's the part that gets you, isn't it? Not the one loud, cruel man, but the 12 quiet, decent ones who decide it's not their business. Not all of them, though. I told you to remember Kayla. She stepped forward from behind the desk, and her voice came out thin, but it came out. Trevor, the change is short. I watched you ring it. Let me just fix it on the... One more word, Trevor Nash said, spinning on her, and I write you up before your shift ends. You're on probation, Kayla. You want to lose this over a stranger? Her mouth closed. Her eyes went bright and wet. She took half a step back and looked at Wesley with an expression that said everything a person can say without speaking. I'm sorry, I can't. I need this job. And Wesley gave her the smallest nod. It's all right, that nod said. You did more than most, and it was more than most. But then somebody did more than that. I don't think that's right. The voice came from the direction of the fireplace, and it belonged to a man of maybe 70, in a green quarter zip and a Glenmara cap, with the ruddy, weathered face of someone who'd played 36 holes for 40 years. Gord Prentice. Member since 1988, past chair of the Greens Committee, a man who had buried 2 wives and outlived most of his foursome, and did not, at his age, have a great deal of patience left for nonsense. He'd been standing there through the whole thing, and something in him had finally come loose. I've been standing here 5 minutes, Gord Prentice said, walking over, and I've watched you shake down this fellow's over a $50 bill you knew was good and shortchange him, and I don't care for it, Trevor. I don't care for it at all. He turned to Wesley. Sir, the soup here is worth the aggravation, I'll give it that much. But the service today is a disgrace, and I apologize for it. Something moved through the lobby then. Not everyone, never everyone. But a couple of heads nodded. The older woman by the coat check said, quietly but audibly, he's right. Trevor Nash's face went a blotchy pink, because the one thing a small man cannot survive is the room turning, and he felt it turning. So he did what small men do. He reached for the biggest thing he had left. He punched open the cash drawer under the desk, and he took out the rest of the change he'd shorted. The coins, the loonies and toonies, a fistful of silver, and he looked Wesley Amoko dead in the eye and he threw it on the floor. The coins went everywhere. Some spun. One toonie rolled a good 10 feet and dropped flat against the hearthstone. A loonie landed on the older woman's shoe, and she jerked her foot back with a little cry. The whole lobby heard it, that bright scattering rattle, and then a silence so total you could hear the fire. "There's your change," Trevor Nash said, and his voice was shaking now, not with fear but with the ugly thrill of it. "You want it? Get down on the floor and pick it up. That's where things like you belong anyway. On your knees." He said the next part slow, so it would land. "We keep the help out back. But you don't even get the back door." Kayla made a sound and put both hands over her mouth. Gord Prentice said, "Now that is enough." But Trevor Nash wasn't listening to Gord Prentice anymore. He was pointing at the floor, "Pick it up." And Wesley Amoko looked down at the coins scattered across the polished stone. He could see his own face in the shine of the floor, a little broken up, cut by the grout lines. He looked at the money, and he looked at Trevor Nash's shoes, tan loafers, tapping now, impatient. "And for one long moment, I want you to sit with what was in that man's chest." Because Wesley Amoko was not thinking about $81 million. He was thinking about a wet green fairway 30-odd years gone, and a man on his knees in it gathering range balls one at a time, and a boy holding a lunch pail, watching, learning what the world thought his father was worth. "You remember this feeling," Emmanuel had said. "And then you make sure nobody working for you ever has to feel it." Wesley did not kneel. He did not raise his voice. He looked up at Trevor Nash, and in a tone as level as a still lake, he said, "Who's your regional director?" Trevor Nash laughed. Actually laughed, head back. "Oh, that's good," he said. "You're going to report me? To corporate?" He spread his arms wide to take in the whole room. "Go ahead, buddy. Call whoever you like. I've been here 6 years. You think anybody's taking your word over mine, dressed like that?" "I didn't ask whether they'd believe me," Wesley said. "I asked for a name." Something in the flatness of it made Trevor Nash hesitate, just a hair, and then his pride painted right over the hesitation. "Margot Levesque," he said. "Regional Director, Northcrest Hospitality. That's the new ownership, not that you'd know what that is. Knock yourself out," he smirked. "Want her number? I'll write it on a napkin. You can read it to the marina." Wesley took out his phone. It was an old phone, scratched screen, and Trevor Nash's smirk widened at the sight of it. Wesley unlocked it, found a name, and put it to his ear, and the whole lobby watched him do it. The foursome, the older couple, Gord Prentice with his arms folded, Curtis Beaulieu in the hallway doorway very still, Kayla with tears standing in her eyes. Even the kitchen staff had drifted to the past to see. The call connected on the second ring. Wesley said 6 words, quiet even, the way another man might order the squash bisque. "Margot, it's Wesley, Glenmara now," and he hung up. Trevor Nash snorted. "First-name basis with the regional director," he said. "Sure. And I'm on a first-name basis with the Prime Minister." He turned to Curtis Beaulieu in the doorway and jerked a thumb at Wesley. "Curtis, get him out of here. I'm done. Trespassing." Whatever you have to write it up as. But Curtis Beaulieu didn't move. "Curtis," Trevor Nash said, "escort him out." "Maybe," Curtis Beaulieu said slowly, the deep, unhurried voice of a man who'd spent 2 decades learning exactly how much trouble a situation was in. "We ought to wait a minute." "Wait for what?" Curtis didn't answer. Because Curtis had heard that phone call. He'd heard 6 words and a hang-up and no explanation and no pleading, and in 22 years of policing he had learned the difference between the voice of a man filing a complaint and the voice of a man giving an order, and that had been an order. Trevor Nash hadn't heard it, or he'd heard it and his pride wouldn't let it in. "You've got 30 seconds, Trevor Nash said to Wesley, "to walk out that door before I call the real police. Not your imaginary regional director, Halton Police." He was breathing hard now, blotches climbing his neck. The whole room was against him, and he could feel it, and it was making him worse by the second. Wesley put his phone back in his pocket. He crouched, unhurried. And I want to tell you, he did not crouch to pick up the coins. He crouched to pick up his own $50 bill, which had drifted to the floor in all of it, and the 50 only. He tucked it in his coat. Then he pulled out one of the leather club chairs by the fire, and he sat down in it, and he crossed his ankle over his knee, and he said, "I'll wait." Trevor Nash's face went from pink to a dangerous red. He opened his mouth, and that was when headlights swept across the tall front windows. A black SUV came up the drive too fast and stopped hard at the doors. An engine cut. A door slammed, and then heels on the flagstone walk, quick and sharp and getting louder, and the front doors swung open, and a woman came through them like a house was on fire behind her. Margot Levesque was in her 50s, a sharp charcoal blazer, reading glasses shoved up into iron-gray hair, and she was already scanning the lobby before the door had shut. Trevor Nash straightened up on reflex. He smoothed his quarter zip. He knew Margot Levesque. She toured the property twice a year, signed off on his scheduling, once told him he ran a tidy front desk. He figured this was about a complaint. Some sorehead had gotten through to corporate. He'd handled worse. A little charm, a little spin. "Margot," he said, stepping forward. "Listen, I can explain. There was a guy causing as she walked straight past him. Didn't look at him, didn't slow. Her heels crossed the lobby, click, 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 and her eyes had locked on the man in the worn canvas jacket, sitting by the fire with his ankle on his knee, and Trevor Nash's sentence died in his throat. Margot Levesque stopped in front of Wesley Amoko, and the whole room watched her face change, watched the fear come up in it. Not fear of danger, but the other kind, the kind that hits when you understand that your superior has just seen with his own eyes exactly what happened on your watch. "Mr. Amoko," she said, clear enough for every soul in that lobby to hear it. "I am so sorry. I came as fast as I could." "Mr. Moko," the name went across the lobby like a cold draft. You could see it hit each person in turn, the foursome by the fire, the older couple, Gord Prentice, whose eyebrows climbed toward his cap. Kayla's hand froze halfway to her mouth, and Trevor Nash. Trevor Nash stood there with his hand still half raised from his failed greeting. And you could watch the whole architecture of the last 20 minutes collapse behind his eyes. "Amako," he said. His voice cracked on it. "That, Northcrest." Wesley stood up from the chair. He wasn't a large man, but he seemed to take up more of the room now than he had a moment ago, and it wasn't the coat that had changed. He looked at Trevor Nash the way you'd look at a spill you'd already decided to clean up. "Wesley Amoko," he said. "Founder and chairman, Northcrest Hospitality." He let it sit. "We closed on Glenmara 3 days ago, Mr. Nash. This club, the land it sits on, the roof over your head." He glanced up, mild. "It's mine. As of Monday, so are you. I want to tell you the sound Trevor Nash made was human, but it wasn't quite. It was the sound of a man discovering, all at once, the full weight of every choice he'd made since the moment a black man in a work coat walked through his front door. He went white. He reached out and put a hand on the reception desk to keep himself upright. "Mr. Amoko," he said, I didn't. If I'd known who you." Wesley held up one hand and Trevor Nash stopped. "That," Wesley said quietly, "is the whole problem. Right there, if you'd known who I was." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't throw that money on the floor because of who I am, son. You threw it because of who you thought I was, a man with nothing, a man who didn't matter. And you were happy to do it. You enjoyed it. I watched you enjoy it." He let a breath go. "If I really had been some fellow up from the marina looking for a bowl of soup, everything you did to me in the last 20 minutes would have been exactly as wrong. The only thing that's changed is that now it's going to cost you something." The lobby was so quiet you could hear the toonie still rocking ever so slightly against the hearthstone. "Margot," Wesley said without taking his eyes off Trevor Nash, "get his access card and his crest. He's done. Effective now, not end of shift. I don't want him ringing another guest through that till." Margot Levesque said, "Of course," and stepped forward, and Trevor Nash, to his shame, tried one more time. He turned to the room, to the members, to the people whose respect he'd assumed he had. "This is insane," he said, a little wild now. "You all saw I was following procedure." Gord Prentice cut him off. "Trevor," he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "Son, I've watched you talk down to that girl behind the desk for 2 years. I watched you today. There wasn't a procedure in the world in what you did." He turned to Wesley and put out a weathered hand. "Gord Prentice, member here since Mulroney. And I'll tell you, sir, I'm ashamed it took me 5 minutes to open my mouth. Should have been the first coin." Wesley shook his hand. "You spoke," he said. "Most people never do." And then, to the room gently, "The gentleman's right to be ashamed of the weight. So am I sometimes. But the weight's the thing to work on, not the excuse to stay quiet forever." Curtis Beaulieu had come across the lobby and now stood at Trevor Nash's shoulder, not aggressive, just present, a shadow with 22 years behind it. Trevor Nash unclipped the crest from his chest with hands that would not stay steady and set it on the desk. He put his access card beside it. And then, because there was nothing else left, he bent down, there in front of the members and the foursome and the phones. And he picked up the coins off the floor, one by one, loonies and toonies and silver, and he set them on the desk in a neat, defeated little pile, and no one told him to. Some part of him just understood it was the only way to leave. He was gone inside 2 minutes. Curtis Beaulieu walked him to the doors. Trevor Nash didn't look back. Now, most stories like this stop there, and I understand why. It feels good, doesn't it, the moment the loud man falls. But if Wesley Amoko had learned one thing from his father's 40 years of raked bunkers and swallowed indignities, it was that firing one Trevor Nash does exactly nothing about the next one. A club that produces a Trevor Nash and then acts surprised when he does what he was built to do. That's a club with a problem in its bones, not its staffing. So Wesley didn't leave. He took off the canvas jacket, and he hung it on the back of a chair, and he stayed all afternoon. He had Margot Levesque pull every complaint filed against the front desk in the last 3 years, and there were more than a few, and every one of them had been marked resolved by the same signature, and the signature was Trevor Nash's. He sat down at a corner table in the grill room. Kayla brought him the squash bisque, and it was, Gord Prentice had not lied, very good. And he spread the papers out and read them one at a time. Guests turned away for reasons that didn't hold up. Member's caregiver, a woman from the Philippines, made to wait outside in February while the member ate. A young black couple, prospective members, told the wait list was closed the same week 2 of Trevor Nash's buddies got fast-tracked. Nobody had ever followed up. The complaints went in and they died. He called Kayla over. She came nervously, twisting her order pad. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. Wesley almost laughed. "No," he said, "you're getting a raise, and a title if you want it." He nodded at the reception desk. "Somebody's going to have to run that front of house properly, and I'd rather it was the one person in this building today who spoke up when it cost her something." He looked at her. "You said it right to his face, and you were on probation. You know how rare that is?" Kayla's eyes filled again, and this time it was the other kind. "I couldn't just watch," she said. "That," Wesley said, "is the entire job. Everything else you can learn." By the time the sun was going low over the lake and turning the maples to fire all over again, Wesley Amoko had done the things that actually mattered, the boring ones, the ones that don't make it into the phone videos. He'd told Margot Levesque he wanted an anonymous conduct line at every Northcrest property. Calls going to an outside board, not to the local manager, because a complaint that lands on the desk of the man you're complaining about is not a complaint. It's a confession you hand to your executioner. He wanted mandatory training, real training, run by people from outside the company, not a video you click through on your phone. He wanted the waitlist audited going back 5 years, and he wanted bolted to the stone wall by the front doors at eye level, a brass plaque. He wrote the words himself on the back of a lunch receipt. Everyone who walks through these doors is owed the same dignity, whether they arrive in a suit or in work boots. If you are ever offered less, or if you see it offered to another, this number will answer. He read it over twice, and then he thought about his father, and he added one line at the bottom, smaller. For Emmanuel, who raked the bunkers. Margot Levesque read it and didn't ask who Emmanuel was. She just nodded, and her eyes were bright, and she said she'd have it cast by Friday. 6 weeks later, on a gray afternoon with the first real cold coming off the lake and a skin of ice at the edges of the pond by the 9th, Wesley Amoko drove his 10-year-old Honda back up the drive at Glenmara. Same coat, same boots, same cap, no logo. He wanted to see it the way he'd seen it the first time, as nobody. He pushed through the front doors. There was a little brass bell above them now that hadn't been there before, and it chimed, a small welcoming sound. The fire was going. The lobby smelled of wood smoke and lemon polish and something roasting down the hall. There was a young man at reception he didn't recognize, new, who looked up and smiled without a flicker of hesitation at the coat or the boots. "Afternoon," he said. "Welcome to Glenmara." "Grabbing lunch? If the grill's open," Wesley said. "Always is this time of day. Kayla's got the room. Go on through. No second look, no tightening of the air, just a man being shown where to sit. And behind the reception desk, in a blazer with the club crest on it, and a name tag that read Kayla Doucette, front of house manager, was Kayla. And when she saw him, her whole face did something complicated. Surprise and recognition, and a warmth that came from somewhere real. "Mr. Amoko," she said, coming around the desk. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "That's rather the point," he said, and she laughed, because she'd learned by now what he meant by it. She walked him into the grill room herself and put him at the corner table, the same one, and she brought him the squash bisque without being asked, set it down gently. The cup square on the saucer, a folded napkin beside it, the way you set a table for someone you respect. Not because of what he owns, but because he's a person sitting in front of you, which was the whole thing, wasn't it? The whole thing his father had wanted him to understand. "How's the room?" he asked her. "Good," she said, leaning against the empty chair. "Really good. The training. People thought it was going to be corporate nonsense, checking a box, but the folks running it are real. A couple of the kitchen guys said it was the first time anyone from management asked how they felt coming to work." She paused. The lines had 4 calls, all handled, nothing buried. "Good," Wesley said. Gord Prentice came in off the practice green, saw Wesley, and came over grinning to shake his hand, and the two of them talked for a while about the maples and the ice on the pond and whether the club ought to keep the range open into November. When Wesley finally stood to go, he took out a $50 bill and laid it flat on the table. "Keep the change," he said. Kayla looked at the bill, looked at him, and laughed. The kind of laugh that comes up before you can stop it, that carries 6 weeks of tension and relief, and something bigger than either. And Wesley Amoko smiled and tipped his cap to her and walked out into the last of the light. By the front doors, bolted to the stone at eye level, the brass plaque had gone up. It had a little patina on it already from the lake air. He stopped and read it, both parts, and ran his thumb across the raised letters at the bottom, the smaller line, the one with his father's name in it. Then he got into his old Honda and drove down the drive and out the gate toward the highway and home. The little pile of coins Trevor Nash had picked up off the floor that first afternoon, the loonies and the toonies and the silver, Kayla had never put them back in the till. She dropped them into a small glass jar and set it on the corner of the reception desk, and there it stayed. New hires always noticed it eventually. A jar of loose change, on a desk in a place where nobody paid in coins. Sooner or later, somebody would ask what it was for, and Kayla would tell them. Every time. The whole story, start to finish, the coat and the counterfeit pen and the money on the floor and the 6 words on the phone. Because a rule on a plaque is a fine thing, but people forget a plaque. They don't forget a jar of coins and the reason it sits there. So let me put it to you, and I want you to be honest, because I think your answer says more about you than any story I could tell. If you'd been standing in that lobby with your phone in your hand, watching a man in a work coat get told to kneel on the floor and pick up his own change, would you have been Gord Prentice, who finally said something, even late? Would you have been Kayla, who said it early and paid for it? Or would you have studied your shoes and told yourself it wasn't your business? Be honest. Because there's a Trevor Nash in more rooms than you'd like to think, and the only thing that's ever stopped one is the person who decided not to stay quiet. If this one landed somewhere, pass it along. Not for me. For the next person who walks through a door in the wrong coat and needs somebody in that room to have already made up their mind.